started 3 weeks ago, though I can't say exactly when I first noticed it. It was subtle at first, almost like a distant hum, a sound so faint you could easily convince yourself it wasn't there at all. But then it grew louder, and now it's impossible to ignore. A sound in the walls, creeping through the house like a whisper that never ends. I remember the night it all became real. I was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to find sleep in the silence. That's when I heard it again, a low scratching sound. It wasn't the creaking of old wood or the rustling of rodents in the attic. This was something different. It had rhythm, almost like something was moving inside the walls, slowly and deliberately. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I'd been stressed. The move to this old house in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly the smoothest transition. The isolation was supposed to be peaceful, a fresh start after, well, everything that had happened. But instead, it felt like the house was suffocating me. That night, I convinced myself it was just an old house settling, the wind, or maybe even a mouse. I almost managed to believe it until the sound became clearer. It was like nails scraping against plaster, dragging slowly along the insides of the walls. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, and the sound had stopped the moment I moved. I sat there for a long time listening, but the silence was thick, almost suffocating. Nothing, not a sound. I eventually lay back down, forcing my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it had been nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke up groggy, a dull headache pulsing behind my eyes. The memory of the sound from the night before was fuzzy, like a half-forgotten dream. But as I made my way through the quiet house, the uneasy feeling followed me. It was subtle, but there an undercurrent of tension in the air. Every creak of the floorboards seemed too loud, every shadow too long. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. I went about my day, trying to shake it off. I unpacked boxes, rearranged furniture, tried to make the place feel more like home. But the sound was never far from my mind. Every time I passed a wall or stood in a room alone, I found myself straining to listen, waiting for it to start again. That night, it did. I was sitting in the living room, trying to read, when I heard it again. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The same dragging, scratching sound, as if something or someone was moving inside the walls. This time I couldn't ignore it. I stood up, heart racing, and walked slowly toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from the far wall, near the fireplace. I pressed my ear against the plaster, holding my breath. The sound was louder now, more distinct. Scratching. A slow, deliberate movement, like nails scraping against the inside of the wall. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish the moment the word left my mouth. Silence. I stepped back, my pulse thundering in my ears. It had to be an animal, I told myself. A raccoon or maybe a rat. That was all. Old houses like this were full of hidden places for creatures to crawl into. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the attic, determined to find the source. The attic was cold, the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones. Dust swirled in the air as I climbed the creaky wooden stairs. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but forgotten boxes and cobwebs. But as I walked deeper into the attic, I heard it again. The scratching. It was louder now, echoing through the space. I stopped, holding the flashlight steady, my breath coming in short gasps. The sound was coming from the floor, directly beneath my feet. I crouched down, pressing my ear to the wooden boards. My hands were shaking, my skin clammy with sweat. The scratching was right below me, slow, scraping, like nails dragging across the underside of the floorboards. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and rushed down the stairs. I slammed the attic door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. I could still hear the sound, faint but persistent, like it was following me. The days passed in a blur after that. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. The sound was constant now, always there in the background, scraping, scratching, like something was trying to claw its way out. It wasn't just in the attic anymore. It was in the walls, in the floors, in every room of the house. I started tearing the place apart, desperate to find the source. I ripped up floorboards, tore down sections of drywall, but there was nothing. No sign of any animals, no holes or tunnels. Just the empty, hollow space inside the walls and the sound. One night, after hours of searching, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and frustrated. The scratching seemed to grow louder, mocking me. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but it was useless. The sound was inside me now, crawling under my skin, buzzing in my skull. And then, for the first time, I heard something else. A voice, faint but clear, whispering. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The whisper was low, guttural, like it was coming from deep within the walls. I strained to make out the words, but they were muffled, distorted. It was speaking to me. The sound grew louder, the words clearer. "Let me out," it whispered. "Let me out." My blood ran cold. I stumbled to my feet, backing away from the wall as if it were alive. The voice repeated, over and over, growing more urgent. "Let me out. Let me out." I ran to the door, but before I could open it, the sound stopped. The house fell silent, eerily so, as if the walls were holding their breath. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The next day, I called someone to come check the house. An exterminator, a contractor, anyone who might know what was happening. But when they arrived, they found nothing. No signs of animals, no evidence of damage. The walls were solid, the house was sound. They looked at me like I was crazy when I tried to explain the noise. But I wasn't crazy. The sound was still there, always there. And now the voice came with it. Every night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Let me out," it would say over and over again. Sometimes it would call my name, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear breathing. Soft, shallow breaths, coming from inside the walls. I stayed up all night again. The house was dark, but my eyes refused to close. Sleep was impossible, not with that thing in the walls, whatever it was, breathing softly, methodically. It had a pattern now, a rhythm. It didn't whisper every night anymore. It didn't need to. The presence was there, close, surrounding me. Each time I passed a wall, it was like I could feel it, pressing against the other side, just inches from me, separated only by layers of wood and plaster. I could almost imagine something clawing its way out, peeling away the wall with sickening slowness. The air inside the house felt different too. Stale, damp, like it was being exhaled from deep within the walls. I couldn't explain it, but every breath I took felt wrong, as though I was sharing the air with something. I should have left the house, I know that now, but leaving meant acknowledging it, admitting I believed that there was something, someone trapped in the walls, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I woke up late the next day, groggy and disoriented. I had fallen asleep in the living room, despite my best efforts to stay awake. The breathing had followed me into my dreams, a constant presence, hovering just behind me, no matter where I ran. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the room. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and froze. Something was different. The air was colder, the shadows darker. And then I heard it, the breathing, not from the walls this time, from behind me. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tense, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was empty. The couch, the chairs, the windows, nothing. But the breathing didn't stop. It was closer now, louder, as if it was right next to me. I stood up, backing away from the sound, my hands shaking. It followed me, growing louder, more labored. Couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The weight of something watching, something lurking just beyond my vision. I bolted for the front door, my hand trembling as I fumbled with the lock. The breathing was right behind me, so close I could feel the cold air of its breath on my neck. I threw the door open and stumbled outside, gasping for air. But the moment I stepped outside, it stopped. The breathing, the pressure, the weight of the presence. It all vanished, as though it had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time, panting, trying to steady myself. The house loomed behind me, silent and still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the windows. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided the house as much as possible, staying out late, finding excuses to leave early in the morning. But eventually I had to go back, and every time I did, the breathing was there, waiting. It started following me from room to room, always just behind me, always just out of sight. I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went in the house, it was there. Sometimes it was so faint I could barely hear it, but other times it was loud. So loud it drowned out everything else, a ragged, labored gasp that seemed to shake the walls themselves. And the whispers, they had changed. They no longer pleaded for release. Now they warned me. Leave, they would hiss. You're not safe. Leave now. But I didn't leave. Couldn't. Something was holding me here, something stronger than fear or logic. It was as if the house itself wouldn't let me go. Each time I packed a bag or made a plan to leave, the feeling of being watched would intensify. The breathing would grow louder, and the walls would move. I started seeing it out of the corner of my eye. Small shifts, subtle bulges, like something pressing against the other side of the plaster, trying to push through. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it, but it kept happening. In the kitchen, in the hallway, even in the bathroom. The walls would bend and flex like they were alive. A week later, I woke up to find scratches on my bedroom walls. Deep, jagged lines carved into the plaster, as if something had been trying to claw its way out. I stared at them for what felt like hours, my mind racing, but I couldn't remember hearing them the night before. I couldn't remember anything from the night before. The scratches weren't confined to the bedroom either. They were everywhere, on the walls, in the hallway, in the living room, even on the ceiling. Long, deep gouges, like fingernails dragged across the surface in desperation. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, watching the walls, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then, around 3 a.m., the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't just in the walls. It was on the floor, beneath my feet. I stood up, heart pounding, as the sound grew louder, more frantic. It was as if something was trying to dig its way up from the floorboards, scratching and clawing, desperate to reach the surface. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the floor, expecting it to burst open at any moment. But then the sound stopped. The house fell silent. I waited, holding my breath, listening. And then, slowly, the breathing started again. But this time, it was different. It was inside the room with me, close, so close I could feel the icy chill of it on my skin. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, a shape, standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the darkness. It was tall, hunched, its form twisted and unnatural. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could hear it breathing. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. It just stood there, watching me, its breath coming in slow, deliberate gasps. And then, in a voice so low I could barely hear it, it whispered, "Let me out." I ran. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't care about the house, didn't care about the whispers or the breathing or the thing in the walls. I just needed to get out. But as I drove away, I could still hear it. Faint, barely there, but unmistakable. The breathing following me. And now, even though I've left the house behind, it's still with me. The scratches, the whispers, the breathing, they're all still there, haunting me, no matter where I go. I can feel it watching me, waiting, just beyond the walls. And every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear it whisper, "Let me out." I don't know why I thought leaving would make a difference. The house was far behind me now, miles of road separating us. But the distance did nothing to erase the creeping sensation that something was still following me. The sound, the breathing, it hadn't stayed in the walls, came with me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. Moving from room to room in the small, cramped motel I'd rented for the week, I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls, willing myself to believe that they were solid, lifeless. But the breathing came anyway. Soft at first, barely noticeable, but it built, just like it had back in that house. A deep, wheezing breath, slow and methodical, filling the air with something cold and wrong. I tried sleeping with the TV on, but the static on the screen began to flicker, as if something were interfering with the signal. The distorted images seemed to ripple and bend, like the walls back in the house. That's when the whispers returned. This time, the voice wasn't far away. It was beside me, hovering in the air near my ear. A soft, rasping sound. More desperate now, more urgent. "You left me," it said. The words were clearer this time. I could feel the breath on my skin, chilling me to the core. "You shouldn't have left." I shot up, backing against the far wall, my heart pounding. There was no one there, there never was. But I could feel something. The air was thick with it. The breathing grew louder, filling the room, like the walls themselves were expanding and contracting with each rasping exhale. The motel walls began to press inward, ever so slightly. I could almost hear them groaning, the plaster stretching, warping like flesh, as though the building was alive. Every breath seemed to pull the walls closer, inch by inch, the space around me tightening. I could feel it getting closer, suffocating me. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, it only got worse. The breathing was no longer confined to the nights or to silent moments when I was alone. It followed me everywhere. In the car, in crowded places, even outside. At first, it was faint, almost lost in the noise of the world around me, but I could hear it. It was always there, lurking just behind me. One night, I made the mistake of checking my reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. I hadn't slept in days. I expected to look like a wreck, but what I saw wasn't just exhaustion. It was something more. My skin looked stretched, thin, almost translucent, like the walls back at the house. My eyes had dark circles beneath them, but the most unsettling thing was the way they seemed to twitch, as though they were no longer my own, as though something was watching through them. I tried to look away, but the reflection didn't move in time. For a split second, I saw it. My face, frozen in the mirror, staring back at me with wide, hollow eyes. And then it smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was wrong, twisted, stretching across my face too wide, too far. My own reflection grinned at me like it was mocking me. And then it whispered, "You can't escape me." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bathroom doorframe. When I looked again, the reflection was normal. My face, my hollow, haunted face, but that grin couldn't shake it. The next day, the walls in the motel room started to bulge, just like before. At first, it was subtle, a slight curve in the plaster, like the walls were breathing, inhaling and exhaling with each slow, deliberate breath. But then the bulges grew more pronounced. The plaster cracked, hairline fractures spreading out in all directions like veins. I stared at the walls in horror as they pulsed, throbbing like something alive. I reached out, fingers trembling, and pressed my hand against the wall. The surface was warm, too warm, and it felt soft, almost like skin. Suddenly, the wall shifted beneath my hand, and I jerked it back. The plaster crumbled, and for a split second, I saw something behind it. Something dark and moving, writhing just beneath the surface. That's when the banging started. Loud, violent thuds, coming from inside the walls, like fists pounding against the other side, desperate to get out. The sound echoed through the room, shaking the floor, rattling the windows. It grew louder, more frantic, the walls trembling with each hit. I backed away, my heart racing, as the bulges in the walls grew larger, the surface cracking and splintering. The breathing was louder now, filling the room, suffocating me with its weight. Then the whispers returned. Not just one voice, but many, dozens, hundreds, all speaking at once, overlapping in a deafening chorus of madness. "Let us out. You brought us here. We're inside you now." I ran. I didn't care where, just away from that room, away from the walls. But no matter how far I went, the whispers followed, the breathing followed. I could feel it inside me now, crawling beneath my skin, like something was growing, festering. I could feel it in my veins, in my bones. That night, I had a dream, though it didn't feel like a dream at all. I was back in the house, standing in the middle of the living room. The walls around me were covered in scratches, deeper and more jagged than before. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was something moving in the walls. Not just a shadow, but a shape. A figure, tall and twisted, pressing against the plaster, trying to break through. Its fingers, long, thin, and impossibly sharp, poked through the cracks, scraping at the air. I could see its face now, distorted and stretched, its mouth open wide, too wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It was smiling. The thing in the walls was smiling at me. And then it began to speak, not in a whisper this time, but in a voice that echoed through the house, shaking the very foundations. "You are mine now," it said. "You brought me with you. You can't escape." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls began to close in around me, the figure pressing closer, its fingers brushing against my skin. I could feel the cold, slimy touch of it, crawling up my arms, wrapping around my throat. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, but the feeling didn't leave. The thing in the walls was still there, still with me, still watching. And now the breathing was inside me. I could feel it with every breath I took, every inhale, every exhale. The slow, ragged sound wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was coming from within me. The following morning, I noticed something else. My skin, it was changing. Pale, translucent like the walls of that cursed house. I could see the veins beneath the surface, pulsing, writhing, like something was moving inside them. The breathing had changed, too. It was no longer just a sound. It was a part of me, filling my lungs, spreading through my body, controlling me. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. And then, without warning, my mouth moved. But I didn't move it. It whispered, in a voice that wasn't mine, "You can't hide from us. We are inside you." I watched in horror as my reflection grinned again. That same twisted, unnatural grin, stretching too wide across my face. And then, it whispered one final, chilling sentence. "We're never leaving." The walls, the voices, the breathing, they weren't just following me anymore. They were inside me, and I don't think they'll ever let me go. I didn't leave the motel. Couldn't. Every time I tried, something would stop me. It was like my body had its own will, something stronger than fear, stronger than my desire to escape. My hands would tremble as I reached for the door, but I'd stop just short of turning the knob. The walls were alive now, pulsing, breathing in sync with me. The line between the house and myself had blurred. I couldn't tell where I ended and where the walls began. The cracks were spreading faster. Thin, jagged lines tore through the plaster like veins, pulsating with a sickening rhythm. I could hear it now, more than just the breathing. It was the steady thrum of something inside the walls, like a heartbeat. It wasn't my heartbeat. It was slower, deeper, more ancient. I knew it was watching me, waiting. I woke up one morning and found my fingers bloody. Deep, raw scratches lined my arms, like I had been clawing at myself in my sleep. I stared at the marks, my mind blank, trying to remember if I had done it. But there was nothing, just a heavy, suffocating fog that clouded every thought, every memory. The whispers came more frequently now. They no longer waited for the night. I could hear them when I was awake, during the day, even when I was out of the room. They were louder, clearer, and angrier. "Let us out," they would hiss. "You can't keep us here. You belong to us now." The worst part was, I started to believe them. Every night, I lay in bed, listening to the breathing, the scratching, the voices. And every night, I felt less like myself. The thing in the walls was consuming me, devouring me from the inside out. I could feel it, crawling under my skin, slithering through my veins. The mirrors had become my enemy. I avoided them as much as possible. Every time I caught my reflection, it seemed to move just a fraction of a second too late. I would look away, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see it. Asterisk me asterisk, still staring, still watching. There was something wrong with my face. My skin was too pale, too stretched. My eyes had sunk deep into their sockets, hollow and lifeless. And that smile, it was always there now. That sick, twisted grin that didn't belong to me. It was as if something else was wearing my face, pretending to be me, but getting the details wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in, that the room itself was shrinking. It wasn't just in my head. I could see it. The cracks grew wider every day, the plaster crumbling to dust. And behind the walls, something was moving. I could hear it at night, shifting, crawling, like a mass of writhing bodies, all struggling to break free. Sometimes, I could see shadows flickering just beneath the surface, shapes that didn't belong to this world, twisting and contorting, pressing against the walls as if they were about to burst through at any moment. The smell was the first thing I noticed when the walls began to bleed. It was subtle at first, just a faint, metallic scent in the air, but it grew stronger with each passing day. I would wake up to find dark, wet stains on the walls, seeping from the cracks. I touched it once out of morbid curiosity. It was warm, sticky. My fingers came away stained red. Blood. The walls were bleeding. I tried to clean it, but the stains wouldn't go away. They just spread, creeping along the floor, dripping from the ceiling. The more I scrubbed, the more it bled. Soon, the room was drenched in it. The smell was overwhelming, thick and cloying, filling my lungs with every breath. I could taste it in the air. I could feel it on my skin. And then, the whispers turned into screams. They were inside my head now, not just in the walls. They were screaming my name, over and over, louder and louder, until I thought my skull would split open. "Let US out," they screamed. "You can't keep US here." I clawed at my ears, trying to drown them out, but it was no use. They were inside me. I started tearing at the walls, desperate to find whatever was hiding behind them. My hands were bloody, my nails broken, but I didn't care. I had to get to it. I had to see what was there. I could hear it so close now, just on the other side. The thing in the walls. The thing that had been watching me, waiting for me to break. The thing that had whispered in my ear, that had breathed down my neck. I ripped away the plaster, chunks of it crumbling in my hands, revealing the dark, rotting wood beneath. And there, in the center of the wall, I saw it. A hole. Small at first, but growing larger as I pulled at it. The air that seeped through was cold, rancid, like the breath of a corpse. I peered inside, my heart racing, my hands trembling, and then I saw it. Eyes, hundreds of them, all staring back at me from the darkness, wide and unblinking. They were everywhere, embedded in the wood, staring through the cracks, watching my every move. And behind the eyes, I could see faces, twisted, contorted faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands reaching out, clawing at the air. They were trapped, buried alive in the walls, their bodies twisted and broken, fused with the very structure of the house. And they were all watching me. "You brought us here," they whispered. "You are one of us now." I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until I couldn't scream anymore. But the faces didn't move. They just watched, their eyes following me as I backed away, as I stumbled to the door, as I ran out of the room, out of the motel. But even as I ran, I could still hear them. The whispers, the breathing. The thing in the walls wasn't trapped anymore. It had followed me. It was inside me. And now, no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can still hear it. It's with me always. In the walls, in the air, in my mind. It's breathing, whispering, watching. And one day it will take me too. I didn't run far enough. I thought I could escape, that I could leave it all behind. But I was wrong. Followed me. It always would. The drive was a blur. Fleeing the motel, speeding down empty roads, the night pressing in on all sides. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was far away from the bleeding walls, the eyes, the faces. But it was pointless. The whispers never stopped. The breathing grew louder the further I drove, like it was catching up with me, crawling closer with every mile. I pulled over eventually, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My body felt foreign, like something had burrowed beneath my skin. I could feel the thing inside me, writhing, growing. I looked down at my arms, and I saw it. My veins, dark and swollen, twisting under the surface like roots, like they were spreading. I got out of the car, stumbling into the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of rot, the same stench from the house, from the motel. It clung to me now, soaked into my skin, into my clothes. There was no escaping it. The whispers were in my head, not just outside. They had always been in my head. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, clutching at my arms, my chest, trying to rip the thing out of me. But there was nothing to pull out. It wasn't something that could be removed. It had always been there, lurking, waiting. The thing in the walls wasn't just in the house. It was in me, always had been. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. There was no one to hear me, no one to help. And then, slowly, my skin began to tear. At first, it was small, delicate, like the cracks in the walls. Thin, jagged lines appeared across my arms, my chest, my legs. But they spread quickly, opening wider, revealing what was underneath. And underneath, there was nothing, just darkness. Just the same writhing, twisting void that had been behind the walls. The thing inside me was pushing through now, breaking free, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The whispers grew louder, deafening. A chorus of voices all speaking at once. "Let us out," they screamed. "We're inside you. You can't escape." I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold me. My body was breaking apart piece by piece. The skin on my hands peeled away, revealing nothing but darkness beneath. I could feel the thing inside me now, moving, shifting, trying to take over. My vision blurred, the world spinning around me as the thing inside me grew stronger, more powerful. I could feel its thoughts merging with mine, its voice becoming my own. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was hollow, an empty shell, and the thing in the walls had finally filled it. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was my reflection, shimmering in the rearview mirror of the car. My face, stretched and twisted into that same grotesque grin. The same one I had seen in the mirrors, in the walls. The same one that wasn't mine. And then, as the last piece of me disappeared, I heard the voice one final time, echoing inside my head, cold and merciless. "You're one of us now." Everything went black, and I became part of the walls.